Okay, well, we are live for this session. This is a chat that's going to be actually with the unicorns and some of the companies that are bigger than unicorns. I want to start just by introducing everybody, but I'll let you live for this session. This is just hearing a little bit of feedback, so that's going to be actually with some technical issues. But anyway, what I want to do is go around and introduce everybody. My name is Samuel Burke. I'm the host of hashtag WFH, Work From Home, which airs on CNN in Asia. And I guess everybody's doing the same, working from home right now. So if I could just go around and introduce everybody. Varga, I'll start with you. If you can just tell me a little bit about you and the company. Keep it brief so we can all introduce each other and get right into the discussion.
Sure. My name is Varga. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer of a company called UiPath. That was born out of Romania, and that is currently the global leader in a market segment called RPA, which stands for Robotic Process Automation.
All right. Greg, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Greg Carpets. I'm the General Manager at Grammarly Business, residing in our founding office here in Kiev, Ukraine. And in brief, it's Grammarly is a writing assistant that helps around 30 million people write more clearly and effectively every day. And I'm happy to join this session with you.
Thanks, Greg. And Atanas.
Hello, I'm the Senior Director of Viber. I joined Viber in the very early stage of its development to boost its global expansion around the world. I'm running Europe, Middle East, and North Africa. And also I'm doing projects with telecoms around the world for Viber.
Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. My real question is, are you really European unicorns? Because I know all of your companies very well. Viber, for instance, I've been covering since really just months after it launched. And so many of these companies, I think unless you're a tech journalist like me, or you're really deep into the techosphere in Europe, you wouldn't even realize that these are European companies. So Varga, are you really a European company? Where are your headquarters? And why do we think you're an American company?
Well, I mean, for tech, I don't know how my colleagues feel, the notion of nationality is a bit muted. We are first and foremost a global company, but we do have roots in Romania, where the company was founded. Romania is still the single largest location in terms of employment. The founder and many of the top managers are Romanian nationals, but we're truly a global company. There are our clients are all over the world, and we have, I think, employees from more than 30 different nationalities. So in that sense, I think, like many tech companies, because of the products we use that are usually global in their appeals, we are also global in terms of nature of who we are. So yes, we were founded in Europe, but we are truly a global organization.
But was that a conscious decision you made to have such a big office in the United States, to present yourself not necessarily as an American company, but maybe not necessarily as a European company? Is this kind of just how it is in the tech world when you're not an American company?
Well, I think you cannot be a global tech company and ignore the American market. First of all, it is the largest tech market in the world. So from a market standpoint, but beyond that, it's also the country with the deepest ecosystem for the tech world, be it on the financing front, with the large and experienced VCs of the Silicon Valley, be it with the analysts, where many of the leading analysts are located in the US, be it in terms of the bench strength of talent. You can actually find talented bench strengths of people that have experienced hyper growth before in the tech world. So I think all these factors brings you eventually to have an important presence in the US, both in terms of talent, funding, and customers. So in our case, it was a no-brainer, as we always had the ambition to be the global leader of our sectors, that we needed to have a strong presence in the US. So we officially, if you will, moved our headquarters in the US. The US is an important part of our sales and our employee base, but not the majority. But a good chunk.
What I'm just curious about, Greg, as you listen to this and we think about Grammarly, for instance, I'm sure most people don't realize the Kiev connection. I mean, do you think that this is a disadvantage to a lot of us who are working in Europe, that so often these companies, yes, on a consumer level, it can help to make it appear like a multinational or no national in many cases. But do you think that it kind of undercuts or undersells everything that's going on in Europe, particularly in emerging Europe, the countries that we're talking about, which are doing so well, but so many people don't know that unless they're told that or do the deeper research, Greg?
Yeah, so maybe it's not about like too much about the undercut, because when we moved the headquarters from Ukraine to San Francisco back in 2010, the main reason for that was the talent pool. And, everyone knows that, if you want to build an exceptional product and with exceptional people, it's you have to have access to the exceptional talent. And I'm not undervaluing Ukraine and any other countries on talent pools, but in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, you have people who were working at companies like Facebook, Google, Amazon for quite some time, and they have some expertise which they can bring to Grammarly and any other companies who are moving their headquarters and have more presence in US.
And Atanas, you kind of touched on this a bit. When I think of Viber, first I think of it as an Israeli company. Then I started thinking of it as a European company. And then later on, I started thinking of it as an Asian company, as you guys have changed hands. So what makes Viber distinctly European, a European unicorn, and bigger than a unicorn, really?
Okay, so I would say that I want to echo some of the points that Varga and Greg mentioned, but also to slightly differ from them. That it's very much depends on what kind of business you are and how the market develops. Because we are competing in a market where one of the shortest jobs that we have is that our competitors are very few, but they are Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and only a couple of other guys. So basically, we are a fairly small company, even when we put Rakuten as part of the picture, compared to the biggest companies and the most aggressive ones in the world. And Viber has a very, very strong heritage in Eastern Europe. Most of our developers for the apps are in Eastern Europe. They were when we were founded, and they are still here. I would say that the majority of our commercial teams have very strong connections to Eastern Europe and to emerging Europe. So we have a lot of people. I'm based in Sofia. I could have been based anywhere in Europe, and I chose my home country and my home city, although I'm doing business development and deals and marketing in 42 countries. Like it's one plane flight away. The shutdowns cuts everybody's connection. So basically, even the people in London don't meet people in London in person nowadays. So basically, the world is changing, and we actually really prove that such model can work. Of course, we have a lot of heritage and a lot of colleagues, and I would say that the founders were based in Tel Aviv, in Israel. But nowadays, if you ask us, well, where is the HQ of Viber, I can't really tell you. What does it mean, HQ nowadays? My bedroom, our CEO's house, what does HQ mean anyway nowadays?
Yeah, a lot of us are suffering from the same issue. So what I'm curious now is, as your companies have grown, particularly flourished in emerging Europe, who were you modeling yourself after? Were there other companies in the region that you took inspiration from? Not necessarily copy paste, but you saw, okay, here's a company that's done it well and in this region, and tried to follow their footpaths. Varga, I'll start with you.
I mean, to the risk of coming across as arrogant, and in fact, actually one of the main value of our company is humility. We had nobody to model ourselves from coming from Romania. We actually, in fact, in this specific case, the fact that we were coming from a small country, we turned it into our advantage in the sense that any market was bigger than our home market. So instead of having, I would say, the typical approach of, I would say, a company that was born in the Silicon Valley that has a good runway in the US first, and I'm talking here about enterprise software, which is a little bit different than Viber and WhatsApp that you need, global presence immediately. Usually they tend to grow in the US, then have a beachhead in the UK to enter the UK market, and then eventually go to Asia. We literally went into 30 countries in 18 months period, because any market is bigger than our home market. And we also went with the humility of people who have no idea how to sell in these markets. Again, the Silicon Valley-based company comes to Japan, and by the time they arrive to Japan, they have already been successful in their go-to-market model, let's say for 3 or 4 years in the US and 2 years in Europe. So they come with very hardened way of doing things. And they say to the Japanese, this is how you should be selling my product. And it doesn't always work that way. We came in and said, we tried to hire a really talented Japanese country manager, and we were lucky enough to do so. And we told him, here's our technology. You tell us how this can be sold to the Japanese customer. So we brought with us, because of our roots and our country, a deep humility that served us well. And then we mixed it with the boldness of our American colleagues. So we try to have these two values, which is humility and boldness, and which has helped us grow the company, which I think it's a unique recipe. And in that sense, we had, unfortunately, nobody to model ourselves after coming from Romania.
So, and did that make it easier or harder in a way? I mean, so much of tech is, of course, breaking so many of the structures that keep old corporations and their old business models. So in that sense, did it make it easier because you were forging your own path to not be stuck by the confines, I guess I should say, of those old models?
Yeah, I think it made it easier because we have an exceptional founder that is very open-minded. And for 2 years, you were talking about where the headquarters is at Tanas. For 2 years, really, all of us, our headquarters were in airports, in airplanes. So we basically whizzed around the world for 2 years, listening to clients all over the world, opening offices, being very humble and bold. I mean, bold because we had nothing to lose, and humble because we had no idea what we were doing in most countries we were coming in. The only thing we knew is we had a good product.
Well, and Atanas, I think I see you wanting to jump in. The reason that I'm asking this question is because I know from so much of the reporting that I've done in Israel, so much of the reporting that I've done here in the US, it's knowing that other company that did well, somebody that you went to college with, a founder that was a mentor that can help one unicorn become another unicorn in these environments. And I think it is interesting. I'm not surprised by Varga's answer that you kind of have to forge your own path. But what does that mean for the European tech ecosystem when so many of you are forging your own path in a much more individual way than a lot of other tech companies? So for you, was there another company that you could lean on, another founder who you'd see have success in your own market? Or was it much like Varga's describing, just paving your own path?
Well, for sure there was Skype. Skype was definitely an inspiration for European startup that made a big impact early on in the industry on the PCs and the landline connections of the day. And of course, shortly before Viber, also WhatsApp started. So at the same time, WhatsApp was focusing on messaging. So actually, they were just disregarding calls, as you probably remember well. And our founders and the founding team actually decided to really make use of some strategic advantages that they can borrow. So first of all, the Israel, Belarus, and Israel-Russia connection that like a lot of the people in Israel are actually have their families and heritage from Eastern Europe, so they speak Russian. So they had very good connections to tech talent, and they were one of the first that could actually go with more capital and can empower these development teams. And at the same time, borrow some of the good practices that worked on other platforms or on other types of reality, and then to try to push them to the new world. Because like in 2010, our smartphones were baby smartphones, and the best that you can hope for was 3G connections, which were like nothing like what we have right now. So it was pretty hard technical challenge. Although nowadays everybody might assume that it is something that is a game. But back then, to make sure that we can hear each other on a smartphone, was a very tough challenge. And this is what Viber basically managed to do. And of course, there were inspirations, some of the big names out there. And we are actually happy that we are now being compared with them, and actually quite favorably to some of even the names that I mentioned.
It's really interesting that you mentioned Skype, because of course there's so many companies, so many startups, so many founders who to this day talk about how Skype inspired them. Greg, for you, was it somebody in your country, your region, that's really helped you or Grammarly pave the way?
Yeah, this is interesting because we actually didn't have anyone to look for when we started the whole thing. The idea was originated by the previous project that the founders were working from. The company was based on helping institutions to detect originality, so-called plagiarism check. This is the first project that our founders were working on, and while they were finishing their master's degree, they noticed that yes, students do plagiarize, but they plagiarize sometimes not because they just want to cheat, but because they cannot communicate effectively. And then when we saw this first company, we thought about, what can we actually do to help the students rather than policing them. And this is how the idea of Grammarly came up. So we try to focus our time and energy on helping students rather than just policing them for that plagiarism. And then starting from education only, this idea of Grammarly rolled into the whole global consumer business that we have right now, with an addition of an enterprise that we are starting to build here. So this was an interesting switch where we didn't have anywhere to follow. We just followed our own dreams and ideas at some point.
But was it pretty much solo then, or was there another company you looked at, a Skype, in terms of scaling, maybe not necessarily building the product, but were there other peers that you had in the European market that were able to take you from the great idea to scaling?
In terms of scaling, the majority of scale actually happened when we moved headquarters to San Francisco, and when our current CEO, Brad Hoover, joined the team. And so he laid the main pillar for scaling per se, because we didn't really look into the consumer brand, the consumer business at that point. So at that point, it's mostly understanding that we won't be able to suffice for too much in educational business, and that's what made it switch into consumer and then eventually the enterprise business for Grammarly.
I think it's an important point to make, even though here we are talking about emerging Europe, but you can be a great European company. You can have your employee base, the heart and soul of the company in Europe, but you will have to go to other places, which doesn't make you any less European per se, but is just part of the global business, which you can see from the Middle East to Africa and Europe, that this is how the techosphere works. I'm curious about what mistakes you made along the way as you were emerging in Europe with your companies. that other people could learn from who are also launching their own startups in the region? Varga, are there mistakes that other companies should know that you made so that they don't have to make them?
Well, I think there are so many advices out there, but I do believe that you have to make your own mistakes. It is not a problem to make a mistake. What is important is that you have to have the ability to self-correct and be agile. We don't have time to agonize around analysis paralysis when we're a tech world and hyper growth. Make decision quickly, observe, and do corrective actions. So probably the most common mistake you are going to make as you grow into many territories is hiring the wrong people. And that is for multiple.
Everybody's nodding their heads in agreement.
And that is for multiple reasons. One is because of the speed with which you're doing it. Second is, let's just be very honest, when you're an Eastern European company that arrive, let's say, to the US, etc., you're not going to attract the A team at first, and unless you're very lucky. And it's okay. Just take whatever team you have, go to wherever you can, and don't be shy about the next stage to change part of the team and to self-correct and to see who has the right values and the right experience for that specific moment of growth of your companies, because you are going to need different profiles and different skills as you're growing. It's very unlikely that the team that takes you to an IPO or to a decacorn or whatever corn thing, it will be 100% as the same team that helped you get started. And that is okay. And that is fine. That's not, in a way, I wouldn't even call it a mistake, but it's this ability to readjust and reinvent. There are also, for those of us who do not have the chance to find the product market fit immediately, it's okay to try and to adjust. So the key ingredient is, I cannot give you general mistakes not to make, because every company, depending on their product, their market, they're going to have their own mistakes. But the only general advice is, and I think it's a motto of the Silicon Valley, it's fail fast. In other words, adjust fast. Constantly look at what you're doing. Look what hypotheses you made when you made that decision. Check whether it is okay. Don't be emotionally attached to any of your people or decisions.
It's interesting that you talk about not being able to hire the A team. I was speaking to the CEO of a Silicon Valley based company, Liga Data, and they're a company that has about 50% female. And I was asking, how did they get that? And they said, well, because we look for people who aren't the A team at first, in part because of budget. And I thought that was fascinating, that because they were looking where other people weren't looking, they were able to hire more women, but also long-term, they found people who were actually better quality. They thought people who maybe weren't at the A level yet, but were on their path to the A level. So that was, I think that's something that I've heard more and more from a lot of startups, especially as Silicon Valley's become more competitive, that if you look other places, you will find those gems. You might have to look a little bit harder. Atanas, aside from what Varga was talking about how you hire, about embracing those failures, what mistakes did you make in Europe as you guys have been expanding that other people can learn from?
Okay, so first of all, definitely the part of the team is very, very relevant, because basically when you have such a blitzscaling enterprise, it's like driving a fast car. So you need to have very good drivers for the fast car, or otherwise you might crash fast. Okay, so like a small crash is okay, but a big crash might be something that has to be like generally avoided, let's say. What I can add on top of that is, because we are more into the consumer space, not so much on the B2B, where it's more about doing like face-to-face negotiations. So we are very much about storytelling. So I would say that one of the probably the mistakes that we have done, or things that we could have done better earlier and in a more formal way, was our storytelling around privacy and security. Because as a matter of fact, if you put if you look at the technical facts on that, for example, Viber has end-to-end encryption. We launched it. We actually had a beta version which had some bugs, which was ready before WhatsApp announced that it is rolling out end-to-end encryption and so on. So we were late by literally days, probably not hours, but a couple of days to actually announce it first. But we have built on top of that a lot of things in terms of commitment. So like it is on default on everything, functionalities that I don't need to dwell on it. But at the same time, there is another player, Telegram, that is saying that they are very, very secure, very, very committed to this part. But actually, when you look at the technical commitments in terms of between them and their users, actually, it's a very, very good storytelling based on this foundation. Of course, I won't go into direct comparison and so on, but this is a very good example that I think that everybody can understand. Probably even some of your viewers might say, yeah, but they are saying they have put a lot of things and hackathons and so on. But the simple fact is that nobody at Viber has any access to any picture, text message, or anything that you exchange. This is also true to WhatsApp, for WhatsApp and so on. So why then a lot of people think that Telegram is safer? Because it's a very good storytelling on that front. We made a lot of storytelling very much better on other fronts, so like fun, stickers, chatbots, and so on. But I think that this is an example of something that we can definitely admit that it was a very good job.
I'm curious. I mean, it's of course, working in media, we know it's all about telling stories, but that's something new that a lot of tech people, a lot of founders have to come to. So somebody starting their future unicorn right now, what would your advice be to them to miss that? I mean, I always think that Americans are so good at telling the story, about bragging, that type of thing. It doesn't come naturally to a lot of other places. So would your advice be to get a PR person from the beginning, get some type of PR Svengali who can help you create that narrative, create that story to make sure that you're competitive in the marketplace of storytelling and tech?
So basically, the simple version of this advice will be not to rely that the technology will tell an inspirational story by itself. So you actually need to put some magic powder and some inspiration on top of that so that people can really connect to what you are telling them. Because not everybody understands tech lingo, not everybody understands the specifics of what we are building and what stays behind it. Because sometimes somebody that might have a different implementation or weaker implementation might tell a better story, and then it might be even more believable for the average users, which can't bother and won't ever bother to get into the details. And this is, I would say, more relevant to the B2C part than on the B2B, because as a matter of fact, the same approach that we had was very, very successful on the B2B part. So actually, a lot of the things that we pushed and we managed to sell to businesses, like business messaging from businesses to APIs to our platform, was actually adopted by our competitors, even bigger ones.
But if you could go back and do it differently, what would you have done? I mean, in terms of practical implementation, business terms, hiring more PR people, what is it?
We're putting more time of the marketing teams and probably also the top management into telling this story in a very convincing way. So really, really polishing this part, because you have only a couple of minutes to do that. And also sometimes it's a matter of very good positioning of your brand, especially when you are a consumer brand and you are somewhere on the shelf in the App Store. You really have to have a very clear position.
And I should just note, since I'm talking about how Americans are so good at bragging, I mean, sometimes it goes full circle. Of course, you have the famous companies like Theranos, they're better at marketing themselves than they are at actually creating the product. So you can also fall into that trap as well. Greg, what would you do differently? What mistakes did you make that you would hope other European companies could learn from, the faults that all of us make along the way?
I would say I would not call it a mistake. It's a thing that we could have done earlier, and this is investing in team values, because values really affect people. Values really affect who you hire and how long will they stick with you. And at the very first, first date, we didn't have any unified process around how we hire people, how we make sure that they stay in the long term. And we actually hired a consultant from Zappos, if someone remember that company back in 2010, 2009. And this person helped us.
The shoe company that was acquired by Amazon.
Yeah, this one. And they helped us to define our very own values that, they're pretty simple, like eager, be empathetic, be adaptable, be remarkable, and so on. And then we started to tailor the hiring process based on Grammarly values. So even if you're like selling like a wolf from the Wall Street, if you're not passing our values check, you are not hired. And then we came up with a team who is moving into a single direction with a single purpose. And it really helped to unify our teams across offices. I mean, Kiev, San Francisco, Vancouver, and New York. So this is
But how do you define values? I mean, that's such a lofty thing to talk about. How do you define values inside your company then, if this is such a key component you wish you would have done sooner?
It's an abbreviation. We call it EAGER. And it consists from like being empathetic, being greedy, being remarkable, and being.
Those are some good values to aspire to already.
Ethical and adaptable. So this is kind of it's suited into this abbreviation. And when we hire people, when we stick with the people, we make sure that they have these values in their blood. So
what's the biggest competitive advantage you have, Varga, from having so many employees in emerging Europe? I mean, obviously the cost base we don't have to talk about because everybody knows that, but maybe somebody who's thinking of opening an office, spreading their tentacles into other parts, and they're looking at this part of the world. What are the other advantages that you would brag about as a selling point for emerging Europe?
Well, it's hard to speak on behalf of emerging Europe because it's not such a homogeneous, like Europe is a mosaic. I can only just with humility speak about Romania. I think a couple of things. I mean, first of all, Romania is starting to have a good bench strength of talent because a couple of years ago, the government had made IT jobs tax-free. So that started as well as for historical reason in the communist bloc, Romania and Bulgaria were more into the IT. So that started on a good base, encouraged a lot of actually American companies such as Oracle and others came in, and Microsoft, and opened a base here. So there was a generation of developers who learned from these big companies, but who are now ready, especially after the example of UiPath, to jump into more entrepreneurial endeavors. And these are people who, in addition to their technical talent, are extremely worldly and have a hunger of knowing, of connecting to the world. And if nothing, just the language skills are impressive, at least again for Romania. Most young Romanians speak fluently 3 to 4 languages. In addition to Romanian, they will all speak English, and they usually speak 2 or 3 other European languages, be it French, German, Italian, which are the most common, or Hungarian, depending on the area of Romania they're coming from. So I would say, people who are eager, people who are talented, and I am not going to say that there is not as much competition for talent, because this is no longer the case. There is now as much competition for talent in Romania than in some part of the Silicon Valley. So it is no longer I would say the selling point. Obviously, the cost, there is still a cost differential, but it is talent and a desire to conquer the world. In fact, I don't know if you noticed, Sam, it would be interesting maybe for you as a journalist to look after that. Most of the very large tech companies from Europe tend to come from small European countries, not from the large
For
ones.
sure.
Be it Estonia, Sweden, Romania, Czech, Bulgaria, because indeed there is this we have a humility. We are not hung up on trying to compete with the US or pretend that our home market is as important or whatever. We just go global immediately. So I think that's a plus in terms of mindset for emerging Europe.
Yeah, it's interesting you say it because I live in London, and as soon as I moved to Europe to cover European tech, I found myself having to get out of London a lot to see the real on the ground innovation. Not that there aren't amazing tech companies in London, of course, we all know them, but it's if you look at the ones that have had the major success, I mean, it really has come from the countries exactly like the ones you're talking about, or then they've moved to London, but their roots are in the
TransferWise or
yeah, exactly.
You name it, TransferWise, Spotify, Skype, UI. They're not coming from France, UK, and Germany.
Yeah, and it's funny because so much of the Anglo market is focused on those countries, but if you really do the deep digging, you see exactly what you're talking about, Vargas. Atanas, the same question for you. If an American firm were looking to move to Europe or open an office in emerging Europe, how would you try and sell them? Because there are so many selling points for this part of the world. What would you say are the big advantages?
So I think that Varga was very right to point out that things are changing. And there are different kinds of currents that are applicable to different stages of development in emerging Europe. So like 10 years ago when Viber started, there were not very too many exciting projects in Belarus. And Viber was definitely something very exciting. It grew very fast, but now there is a lot of competition. 4-5 years later, when I started and when I built the first business office, actually there weren't that many exciting business offices to be based, for example, in Sofia in Bulgaria and in many of the other countries. So we joke that in Bulgaria, there is an infinitely more people working for Viber than the FANG employees. So because there are zero. So we have this kind of advantage. And we actually tapped a very interesting current of very ambitious, very well developed young talent that had built careers and education in Western Europe that wanted, for different reasons, to come back to Bulgaria. So when we pushed this kind of opportunity, we managed to tap into this talent. And actually, I think that this trend right now is amplified in a way because of the pandemic. So there are a lot of people, because of work from home before, because of distributed teams, a lot of people that have been very talented, went to build careers at Google and in many other places. They are starting to reconsider to strengthen actually the ecosystem in emerging Europe. So it's not only homegrown, but actually it is really now a wave which is coming back after it's spread across Europe, US, and other places, because there may be many different reasons, but actually the quality of life is starting to be competitive. People don't really like that much nowadays big cities. And
it's interesting you say it because Andrew introduced me to a really great group of people in Romania, and I really saw a lot of people who are leaving the UK, going back to Romania, in part because of Brexit, as we talked about in the earlier session, but the quality of life. And even some non-Romanians, for example, I'm just using this country as my example, saying, yeah, I find Varga's raising his hand because the quality of life is so amazing and costs can be cheaper. Greg, we just have 3 minutes left, so I want to ask you, selling emerging Europe, what are the biggest bragging points that you have as an entrepreneur?
The biggest bragging point. Could you define it a bit more?
No, I mean, if you were trying to sell your part of the world to a San Francisco company looking to expand their office, I mean, what do you think is a great advantage for your company where you are, as opposed to opening up an office in London or wherever it might be? What does emerging Europe have to offer in your eyes?
Well, I mean, if advocating for Europe per se, right? I can say no more because the largest part of Grammarly team is here in Kiev. So most of the staff is here, and from what I know, they are not looking for moving anywhere in long term, because just like mentioned, the quality of life is here, especially if you're working in IT sector. And even during the COVID times, we see people just coming back for now, staying here. Who knows what they will choose later, but we see these trends. And even when our C-suite people from the US, like founders, general managers come here, they say hey, Kiev is a great place to be. And some of them are mentioned that maybe they will be willing to move to Ukraine for some times. There are places like Kiev, Odessa, Lviv, so many. So
I believe it. Listen, I'm one of those people. I'm completely sold. It was something really foreign to me, and having taken the time to report and get to know the people and see the products, I can really testify that it is all of the things that you are describing. Varga, Atanas, Greg, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I know this would be incredibly helpful to anybody looking to follow in your footsteps. And so I just want to thank you so much for your time, and look forward to connecting with you guys again.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks.
Let's do it next time in person.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.